So, I finally scored my first episode, my first real episode of the Jonah Falcon Show, and I had to find something that would kick it off in a really good way, and I think I did with my first guest, who is basically a Hollywood legend. But the funny thing is, he's a legend within Hollywood. As a comedy writer, as an occasional stand-up comedian, he knows everybody, and everybody loves him. And I've known him since the late 90s because he's been a really good friend. So I'm glad he agreed to do this interview with me. But the problem is that he's done so many interviews. He's been interviewed to death in the past 10 years. And the problem for me, the big trick, was finding original content that I could get from him that really wasn't that much known. And I'm going to tell you something. There's probably stuff in here which you probably already know about him. So I hope I have some stuff that people on YouTube 50 years from now will look at and say, hey, I didn't know that about Bruce. Yes, and as if you didn't guess already, my guest is Bruce Vilanch. And probably the biggest question I have is, where the fuck am I? So I'm wearing this t-shirt for my interview with Bruce because here's the thing. He's famous for wearing shirts that are either double entendres or dirty or really salacious, and believe it or not, I'm honoring him by doing the same thing. And while The Price is Right may not seem salacious when it comes to me, it does describe me. So Bruce, let's start off with the early days in the 70s when you were writing for an offbeat Chicago paper.
Chicago Today, and it was a tabloid, sort of, that was, it used to be Chicago's American, and the Chicago Tribune bought it, and they turned it from the American into Chicago Today, and then the experiment failed, and they closed it, and they moved us over to the Trib. So then I was on the Chicago Tribune, much more prestigious. Rather right-wing at the time, but prestigious nonetheless.
Well, didn't you have a quote about that? About that you were everybody looked at you confused when you wanted to go to Yom Kippur?
I said I was the first person in the history of the Tribune to ask for Yom Kippur off. They had to look it up. Yom.
Like
that's not entirely true, but there weren't a whole lot of Jews there. There were a few. But they certainly, I mean, the Jews who were there, I don't think took Yom Kippur off. But, you know, I was from a different tradition. I remember there being like, well, yeah, sure, if it's a holiday for you, go take it off.
And which paper were you working for when you did the review for Bette Midler's show?
Chicago Today. It was right after I got there, and well, not right after, because I had a friend. She had a manager named Bud Friedman who ran the Improv, and you could probably see on the old A&E series An Evening at the Improv. He hosted it. And Bud was her manager. She was on Broadway in Fiddler on the Roof as the oldest daughter. And she had a nightclub act she would do at the Improv and at another club called Hilly's. And he sent her out to Chicago on her vacation to open for Jackie Vernon, who was a deadpan comic, who would come out and say things like, when I was a kid, I was unwanted. Now I'm wanted in 13 states. And so she appeared with him to an audience of his fans. And Bud Friedman called me and asked me if I would go and write about her if I liked her. So I went to Kelly's, and I thought she was amazing. I'd never seen anything quite like her. Her act was so witty, and I mean, her style was so vivacious, and her choices were so smart.
Oh, I love this. I love coming back. This is my 800th farewell appearance here at the Continental Baths. I swear to you, I'm gonna feel like a jack in the box. I just broke my toe. Joey's gonna fix it. Mr. Fix-It. That's what I call him around here. Oh, listen. listen, I didn't expect to be back here. I really didn't. They had me booked at Fire Island, Cherry Grove. Cherry Grove, I love it. Hell spa for hairdressers. I was supposed to work at Cherry Grove, you see. I was supposed to sing. But they couldn't find room for me in the bushes.
And so I interviewed her, and I wrote a column about her. I said, and she called me after the column appeared, and she said, well, that was a very funny column. And I said, well, you're very funny. You should talk more on stage. And she said, you got any lines? And that was the phrase I've heard since time immemorial. It's going on 50 years.
So I haven't seen it yet.
I have a fan, Hattie McDaniel. She always wants to get in. She loves that story.
Well, you also, before that, you actually did a movie. My Name is Rocco Papaleo.
My name is Rocco Papaleo.
Papaleo.
Oh. Mm-hmm.
With the great Marcello Mastroianni.
I was at the Trib, yes.
The only reason why I knew about him was from the 1986 Academy Awards, and they finally gave him a Best Actor nomination.
Yeah, for a tender homosexual performance, I think.
Yeah, and I
I forget the name of the picture.
Yeah, so am I.
They finally, they did. They came around. Well, it's the actors who nominate. So it was. It just meant that the actors had seen that movie. Nobody else saw it.
It's like all I remember is the clip of him going into the pool fully in his suit. That's the one thing I remember from that the Oscar clip.
Well, Marcello was a big international star, and he was actually. He never did. I don't think an American picture, but he was. But he was a big art house name here. I mean, he wasn't Sophia. Sophia did a lot of Hollywood pictures, but they worked together in a bunch of things. And so he was really well known. I mean, he was known by people who'd never seen his movies. And a phone is talking to us from the other room. So he was in Chicago making this picture called Permette Rocco Papaleo. Excuse me, my name is Rocco Papaleo. It was an Italian movie. It was the second movie directed by Ettore Scola, who became a big deal Italian director. And Lauren Hutton was the leading lady. And I was in Chicago writing, and I was acting. I was doing commercials and stuff on the side. And there was an agent in Chicago, Shirley Hamilton. She was the agent. Everybody in Chicago who was cast in a movie or TV show was cast by her. And so I was in a restaurant one night near the Trib, and these Italians came in, Ettore Scola, and he came over to me, and I was very animated in the conversation. He said, "Ufez, I like a Ufez." And so the next thing I know, I got a call from Shirley Hamilton saying, this Italian director met you in a restaurant, and you told him your name, and he wants to cast you in this picture. So I proceeded to play this role, and here's what the movie was about. Marcello played an Italian mine worker who has come to Canada with his friends because they can't get work in Italy, and they work in a Canadian mine. And while they're in the mine, they discover that a big Italian fighter is going to be boxing for a championship in Chicago. And so they all get on a bus and they come to Chicago. And the movie is his odyssey in Chicago. And among the things, the principal thing that happens to him is that he sees an ad for Virginia Slim cigarettes with Lauren Hutton. And she actually was in the ads for Virginia Slim cigarettes. And he pursues her. And of course, conveniently for him, she lives in Chicago and walks down the street and he sees her. That's another story. And he gets mugged, he gets mistreated, he winds up on Skid Row, and he stumbles into a bar where ex-fighters hang out. And it is run by an ex-fighter named Mama, which is me, a big, gay ex-pug with a broken nose who in every scene has a hairnet on because he's cooking sometimes. And it was just the oddest thing. I befriend him, and the other people in the bar befriend him, and we help him find Lauren Hutton. And the great thing about this picture for me was I got to get friendly with Marcello, who at the time was living with Catherine Deneuve. They had a daughter, Chiara Mastroianni, who's an actress, and I spent time with them. And nobody spoke the same language. And if you've ever seen the Truffaut picture Day for Night, there's a joke about Valentina Cortese, an Italian actress, who was nominated for an Oscar for her performance in it. She can't remember her lines, and so they write her lines on the scenery. And as she moves around in the shot, she reads her lines off of the scenery. Well, in our movie, everybody spoke whatever language they felt like. The entire picture was dubbed later on. So you didn't have to learn your lines because of that. You just had to know what your lines were, and the real lines would be dubbed in. So they would say what Valentina said in her movie, which is, "Can I just do the numbers?" And what that means is you walk around and you just say 42, 95, 65, 31, 85, 512. Doesn't matter because it's all going to be dubbed in. So we all did the numbers. And it was hysterical to be on the set because we all knew what we were doing, but we just didn't say it. Marcello was speaking French. He was speaking Italian. We spoke French to each other.
Oh, you didn't speak Yiddish?
No, he was not too good in Yiddish. He wasn't too good in Yiddish. In fact, he was pretty good in English, but he hated how he sounded in English because he was afraid he would sound like, like Chico Marx, like, "I'm going to give you such a big hit," because he spoke like an Italian. He spoke with an Italian cadence, which he thought was kind of not dignified for who he was. He was Marcello Mastroianni. And so he decided not to speak any English, except when he had to in the movie, to exaggerate what a rube he was, he would do it. But otherwise, all of his other stuff was in whatever language he felt like talking. It was hysterical, and I had to grow a beard for it. I had to have a 3-day growth of beard for 6 weeks.
Bruce, I have to admit, I miss the beard.
Added to that is the pressure that comes from most of these people are movie stars. Most of them are used to working like this, with a crew and a camera, and if it doesn't work, they'll do it 2 or 3 times or 200 or 300 times.
I grew the beard for this Italian movie that I made in Chicago, and I kept the beard for 32 years, because in the movie I had to have a 3-day growth of beard, and it was a 6-week shoot. And it was 3 days is the itchiest, most awful part of beard growing. And when it was done, I said, "I'm never shaving again." I was so miserable. And then, so I left it. It became a big, luxuriant beard, and it became kind of a signature. And, this was the 70s, and so we were hippies. And so I was kind of like the hippie reporter, the hippie feature writer, and all that. And it just segued when I moved to L.A. in 1975. I just kind of kept it, and I became this bearded person. And then many years, 30 years later, when they asked me to be in Hairspray, I petitioned to keep the beard. And they said, "That's a little too John Waters. We can ask the audience to just make so many buys. We're asking them to make the buy that it's a man playing a woman, and they get that, and they buy it. To ask them that it's a man playing a woman with a hormone problem is one reach too far. It's a bridge too far." And one of John Waters' maxims is that Edna must be played by a woman because he likes the idea, he calls it subversive, of the audience accepting that this old married couple who are totally devoted to each other are in reality 2 men.
But wait a minute. When did you actually first meet John Waters? Go ahead.
That's a very good question. I'm not sure when I actually met him. I probably met him briefly in New York in the 70s. And probably I would see him around because he was based in Baltimore. But he would job out for things. So I must have met him 1 or 2 times, all that. But I think when I really got to sit down and talk to him was in Provincetown, about 2000, when they made a documentary about me called Get Bruce, produced by Harvey Weinstein, who never touched me.
How about
the hell with me too. Why not me?
Well, wasn't that the name of your recent?
Yes, that's why. Why not me? 'Cause I was, having a deep traumatic reaction to not being touched by Harvey. But let me finish. Since you asked about John, John came to see it, and he, it's deconstructing comedy and my writing for a lot of people and all that. And John's reaction to it was being shown at the Provincetown Film Festival. He said, you know, I think you should write for serial killers when they are on trial and they need to get the jury's sympathy. I think you could construct some wonderful stuff for them that would make the jury laugh and they would have a kind of good time. And I thought at that point for the first time, and I've thought many times since, not for nothing is he John Waters. He doesn't pretend to be John. He is John Waters.
That sort of reminds me of the ending of Female Trouble, when the acceptance speech at the end.
I've forgotten. Was there a trial scene?
So at the conclusion of Female Trouble, she shoots some people at her nightclub act, and she goes on trial, and it's heavily weighed against her. So the ending of the movie has her being taken to the electric chair, and when she's strapped onto the electric chair, she starts giving a speech as if she's accepting an Oscar.
I remember that.
Please remember, I love every fucking one of you.
I remember that. I remember seeing that. I remember seeing it at the Playboy Theater in Chicago. Can you believe it? Hefner bought a movie house down the street from the Playboy Mansion, and he decked it all out in Playboy stuff, and it was an art house, and showed a lot of arty movies, and became a head movies like El Topo. You know, everybody would go there, and we would all get completely baked and go watch El Topo and scream. It was an interesting group, I will say that. Aykroyd and Belushi and all the Second City people at the time, the Murray brothers, and Gilda, and John Candy. They came down from Canada. I mean, that was the whole crowd that used to go to those late movies at the Playboy.
Yeah. So, you know, that reminds me now, I was just a young kid in the 70s. But I remember all the variety shows that were coming out at the time, and you were involved with quite a bit of them.
Yeah, I came in at the tail end of Variety. I came out here in '75 to do the Manhattan Transfer, which is a summer show that was replacing Cher, who took the summer off. But I had already written for Sonny and Cher, and Sonny without Cher, and Cher without Sonny, and Sonny and Cher, we hate each other, but we need the money back together, and all of that. And there were a lot of summer replacement shows, but Variety was the last gasp. It was Carol Burnett was the big show, and it didn't take long before Donnie and Marie. I did a whole bunch of those things.
The Donnie and Marie Show with tonight's guests, Ruth Buzzy, Sherman Hemsley, Lassie, and Johnny Dark.
But cable really killed the variety show because it made all of that stuff available 24 hours a day. And so it wasn't special. And the last one really was Barbara Mandrell and the Mandrell Sisters, which I didn't do. But that was kind of the end of it. There hasn't really been, you know, the variety television now is Saturday Night Live and a whole lot of competition shows. And that's how they've gotten variety back on TV, is to make it a contest.
Yeah, but you know the problem I have is that there's no kitsch. I mean, all the shows that you did, Brady Bunch Hour, Star Wars Holiday Special, Paul Lynde's Halloween Special, all of them were extremely kitschy.
Yes, they were. My specialty. Kitschy nightmares without Gordon Ramsay. Yeah, that was not by design. That was just part of the art head of the period. And I guess that went away, although I suppose you could say it's here somewhere, although I don't know where. It seems to me that it was replaced by snark. And snark kind of became the operative comedic style. And that hasn't really changed. I mean, there's some brilliant stuff like South Park. I mean, snark isn't necessarily a bad thing, but it just was, those shows were all kind of good-natured and ridiculous. And also, I suppose you have to argue that a lot of that stuff was conceived and executed during the height of everybody's drug period.
Well, now that reminds me of the B. Arthur variety show that she did. I think it was in '80, in which she was singing with Rock Hudson.
Yeah, right.
Time was when if a fella felt depressed, he simply got it off his chest by calling on a preacher,
talking to his teacher,
open up a half a buck to see a double feature.
But now it's pills, and now it's pot, and now it's poppers, and God knows what. Sniff, sweet pop, and your cares are gone. Cares are gone.
Yeah.
It was from I Love My Wife, a Broadway musical. It was Cy Coleman, and I think Carolyn Lee or Dorothy Fields, I think, wrote the lyric. But Everybody Today is Getting High. That's what it was called. And it was in this musical about two couples, and they try wife swapping because they're trying very hard to be hip. And it was a little musical that was a big hit on Broadway, mostly because of an actor you probably know named Lenny Baker, whose big movie was Next Stop Greenwich Village, a Paul Mazursky picture. And he died shortly after that. But it was the song. The song had its greatest life on television in specials, sung by people who were like, you couldn't picture them really doing these things. Well, Rock Hudson maybe, but we only knew about that later.
Wait a minute. I thought Rock Hudson, well, actually, no. Was Rock Hudson the one who was an open secret? Was he the one in Pillow Talk? I'm trying to remember.
Yeah, he was the one in Pillow Talk.
Yeah, so I heard that he did parties with his gay friends in which they laughed at a gay man playing a straight man, pretending to be gay.
Yes, but that was a crowd of 12. I mean, when you say open secret, it was open to those 12 people. I mean, it was a closely guarded secret. In fact, other people's careers were trashed to protect his secret. There was an actor named Rory Calhoun, who was a Western star, and certain audiences will remember him from How to Marry a Millionaire. He was Betty Grable's ski instructor boyfriend. And when they see him, they can't believe how gorgeous he was. But Rory Calhoun, when the Rock Hudson story leaked, Rock's manager was also Rory Calhoun's manager, and he gave them a story about Rory Calhoun having done prison time in exchange for their silence on the Rock Hudson story. And as a result, Rory Calhoun got fired on a morals clause by the studio and never really recovered. So it was an open secret, but people paid the price.
Okay, Bruce. No, listen. I'm going to date us this podcast right now. We're recording on August 27th, 2018. And, people 50 years from now, after we're both dead, are going to say, oh, I remember that. Or I know who those were. Wait, actually, Bruce, what do you want people to remember 50 years from now about you?
I've never thought of that. I've never thought in terms of legacy or any of that stuff. So I don't really have an answer to that question. I mean, I would like to come up with something really witty, but basically, I guess it's my fear that there may not be a 2068, that everybody will be wearing whatever gas mask they can find because we've so polluted the atmosphere. When I saw Jurassic Park, when I read Jurassic Park, the novel when it first came out.
Michael Crichton.
Mel Brooks' Jurassic Park. Of course, Michael Crichton.
Well, you never know. Mel Brooks produced The Fly.
And pulled it up and down. When I read the book that when it first came out, I thought, dinosaurs. I mean, even if they could produce a dinosaur from a fossil and then have an egg, the minute the egg hatched, the dinosaur would drop dead. It couldn't breathe the air that we've got here now. I mean, imagine how pure the air was millions of years ago when dinosaurs roamed around. I mean, now it's like he would take one breath and go, I'm out of here, done, point, over. So once I got over that, I enjoyed the book no end. And then, of course, I've rapidly loved all of that stuff because, you know, that's a buy you have to make. That the dinosaurs could breathe the air that we breathe, even though...
Well, the reason why I'm mentioning this date is because Neil Simon passed away today, I believe.
Well, he did over the weekend, which this was a weekend here in 2018.
So
where a lot of people died. Aretha Franklin died. Neil Simon died. So I mean, but there are two people who were legendary in their professions. I mean, at the absolute top of the world in what they did, and they both went at the same time.
Well, the reason why I'm mentioning is Mel Brooks actually posted a tweet today. And he said, Neil Simon was a clutch hitter. When we needed the punchline on your shows he delivered. He also delivered 32 plays and over 20 movies. He was one of the sweetest and least jealous writers you could ever work with. For all who knew him, this was truly a sad story.
Yeah, that's true. He was a lovely guy. I mean, he had a very tough reputation. I mean, Mel was putting a little sugar on it. Because I think when you actually dealt with him, he was very sweet. But he was also... tough. He brooked no trout, and he was very helpful to me. He came to see a run through of my big Broadway flop musical, and gave me some great notes on it.
That reminds me, a certain guy named John O'Manelli wanted me to ask you about your 70s libretto.
This is what I'm talking about.
Okay,
right now. He came after the intermission in the run through and said, "Is there anybody in this show we can root for?" And I thought, pay attention. He's saying something important, and of course there probably wasn't. I mean, I thought there was, but he didn't. Or maybe by the time we actually took it to Broadway, we had fixed that. But that was not the problem with the show. I mean, there were many problems. There was a big musical called Platinum, and it ran 33 performances, and it starred Alexis Smith, who was a sort of star at Warner, a second-tier star at Warner Brothers, who became a Broadway star after she did the Sondheim show Follies, and won the Tony for that. But she was never a Broadway star who sold tickets on her own. This we discovered, much to our chagrin, when we had this show that needed a star to get us an advance sale and to keep us going while people discovered the show, because our reviews were mixed. And the show was far from perfect, but and Alexis was brilliant in it, and she got a Tony nomination for it. Didn't win, but she was wonderful in it.
Now, you obviously play a very well-to-do...
Well, I play a movie star from the 40s, and who's been touring in stock and doing MAME and Hello Dolly and shows like that, and decides to create a new image and gets mixed up with this group.
These unsavory characters? Mm-hmm.
But decides to make a record which brings her into the rock scene. And it's marvelous because it covers, well, music from the 40s through the 70s.
And I was very fond of her. She was, is it worth it to talk about her? Because she's, I mean, I discovered when I mention her name, I get blank stares from people, unless they're my age and went to, you know, or watched Turner Classic movies. But, you know, or they're Broadway queens, one of the musical comedy nerds. But yes, that was a show like Jono. Actually, that was that show. Anyway, we subsequently Neil Simon and I would subsequently knew each other socially. We never worked on anything together, but we kept running into each other, and there were many dinner parties. And he just gave me invaluable advice as a writer. He was such a prolific writer, and he had little techniques that he used to keep himself going, and that's why he could produced 32 plays that got done and 20 screenplays, whatever. I mean, he never stopped working. Of course, he didn't do anything else. I mean, other than, you know, get married and have children. But I mean, he was not, you know, there was no Neil Simon live in Vegas. You know, there was no the Neil Simon show. You never saw him on an interview show or anything. Very, very
Wasn't he
rare.
on the show, that show of shows with Sid Caesar?
He wasn't on it. No, he wrote it.
He wrote it.
He was one of the writers, along with Larry Gelbart,
Woody Allen,
and Woody, and Carl Reiner, who was also on it, and Howie Morris, and Larry Gelbart, I think Milt Tolkien, a lot of some other writers who never became media personalities. And Neil Simon didn't become a media personality either. He almost did when our mutual friend Carol Bears Sager, who had written a show with him called They're Playing Our Song, she'd written the lyrics. It was a musical.
Don't you recognize it? That's my first really big hit. 3 years ago this month. Oh, they're playing my song. Oh, yeah, they're playing my song. That's when they're playing my song. Everybody's got a shh. Don't say a word now. Listen to that sweet melody. I'm happy to say in my own humble way, every perfect note of that was written by me.
And she fixed him up with her friend Elizabeth Taylor. And because he had just come out of a marriage, and Elizabeth just come on, probably, she was always coming out of a marriage. There were like 8 of them right now. He felt like, he said to me, I'm this Jewish kid from Brooklyn, it's Elizabeth Taylor, you know. And he kept thinking, you know, Richard Burton. I'm not Richard Burton. So that was very cute. That was sweet.
Do you remember when it used to be possible for a flop to open and close on the same night? Well, that never happens anymore. It's impossible.
No, it happened. It hasn't happened in a while. It hasn't happened in a few seasons. But yeah, that happened all the time back in the day.
I mean, now you have these packages for tourists, and one of the things is we'll take you to a Broadway show. They don't give a shit which show, just whatever show.
Yeah, no, but not. They don't. I think they're a flop show. And when Platinum flopped, I said, my nightmare is I'm going to have to come in and sit here under my name on this thing. And he said, how long did it run? I said, 33 performances. You were a smash. To get on this wall, you got to close. If you could close before you open, if you can close in Philadelphia, I'll give you a better space. So that, if you ever go in there, you'll see this array of tears, tragedies.
The only show I can think of that was dead on arrival was Squonk, and you knew it was going to fail because that was a show that was, well, it was suited to being on Off-Broadway, but it was sort of like Mummenschanz, kinda, but stupider.
Yeah.
And I knew it was going to work. The name and was it
a group like Mummenschanz, the mimes and stuff?
Something like that. It just had a lot of just abstract stuff.
It closed opening night?
I don't know. I just know. Here's the thing. I live on West 26th Street, so I was within walking distance of Times Square. So I would walk by the Helen Hayes. I would walk by all these other things.
Yeah.
And I saw Squonk. I think it was at the Helen Hayes, and I said, "This is not gonna last." Squonk. You look up in international. I mean the IBDB. There you'll see.
I'm desperate to find out.
So. You mentioned it before, early in the interview, but let's talk about Get Bruce.
Get Bruce. Sometime in the late 90s, there was a guy named Andy Keene who was the trailer king. He had a trailer house that made all the coming attraction previews. And we were very close. And I was telling him about working with this one and that one and writing for that one and the other one. And he said, I think there's a great story. We should make a movie about your life. And I said, yes, I agree. But damn shame that Fellini just died. He's the only one who could really do it justice. And he said, no, I want to do it. And he set about doing it. And he made this movie, and he inveigled all my friends and clients, principally Bette Midler, Whoopi Goldberg, Billy Crystal, Robin Williams.
Raquel Welch in that one scene.
And Raquel.
Do it right! Yes. You ditzy blonde. You're the ditzy blonde.
No,
I'm the very together brunette.
Right, show me your entrance.
My entrance. My entrance.
Yes.
Hi. Do you like the dress? Oh, thank you. I borrowed it from RuPaul. Thank you and welcome to the commitment to life for the past 9 years, and then go into serious stuff.
Now my serious benefit mode.
Yes.
Now, changing on a dime.
Yeah, I like that.
Changing on a dime.
Now my serious benefit mode.
My serious benefit
I do
mode.
like that. And now for my serious benefit mode.
For principally were those big four, and then a lot of other people, Nathan Lane, Shirley MacLaine, Raquel, Lily Tomlin, Paul Reiser. There was a nice group, and he shot interviews with all of them. A lot of their stuff was done at a benefit we did, the Elizabeth Taylor AIDS Foundation, Elizabeth's 65th birthday party, which we sold to ABC as a special, and that the money went to her AIDS Foundation.
Because I don't really like getting up and talking as myself at all. I'm not good at that. So it's nice to have Bruce's words. And he can also make it personal for you, so that the words come out naturally. Excuse me, but really meeting you, Elizabeth, was like meeting royalty. I was a nervous wreck because I was wondering how the movie's greatest sex symbol would get along with an itty-bitty small screen goddess.
So they shot a lot of that stuff there. And it was fascinating. It was a deconstruction of comedy, of how you create a persona for people. And I was in it. My mother was in it. The stars of the picture were my mother and Robin Williams. They're both gone, but they were both hilarious. And I was in it. And it's fascinating. If you ever had a documentary, I recommend it, because if you have a documentary made about you, you get to see yourself in many different weight classes and hairstyles. And you get to see teeth you remember once having had, and new teeth, and it's wonderful. It's a scrapbook of your life. You probably will never look at it again. But since they're doing a lot of documentaries now, I mean,
how strange was it though for you?
It was very odd. We made it, and then we sold it to Harvey Weinstein, who was running Miramax, and he re-edited it, and he actually did a very good job. But it was interesting because I had some control, and there were things I didn't want to be shown. I mean, they wanted to construct it so that it was with me and my mother bookending the thing, and I said, no, I don't want this to be a movie about a gay man and his mother. I think that's part of the story, but that's, I don't want that to be it, because it's not true.
It's a showbiz story.
It's a showbiz story. I left home when I was 17, so, I mean, this is not like one of those things like Isaac Mizrahi and his mother, who helped factor his fashion business. I mean, that's all very legitimate and real, but I didn't want that to be my story because it's not my story. So, it was wild. I mean, what happened was we finished it, and Hollywood Squares started, and suddenly I was on television a lot.
Bruce Valanche. Bruce Valanche. All right. Also, with the Jesse Ventura line.
I was in Minnesota.
Oh, good for you.
I was there, yes. It was very warm. It was 40 degrees.
Oh, cool.
Yes.
Oh, good for you.
It was party power.
Oh, my God.
In ancient times, Bruce, the Druids lit fires and wore costumes to scare off evil spirits. What do we call this tradition today?
The Academy Award.
And as a result of being on Hollywood Squares on television every night, I got a lot of publicity for the thing. Miramax released it on a Miramax kind of pattern. I mean, selectively in art houses. It was never a big release. But what happened was Miramax was sold to Disney. And Disney Home Video, which was called Buena Vista Home Video, loved it because there were so many names to put on the box. So they did a big push. And this was when people were actually renting DVDs at Blockbuster and things like that. So it had a big back-end life. And I hear about it to this day, and it shows up on weird cable channels every now and again.
What's Blockbuster?
Yeah, I know. It's one of those things.
It's one of those. They have one in Oregon now, I think.
I know. It's an empty one loaded up with Betamaxes.
Well, it's way after midnight. I finally finished editing the interview. And, I shot a lot more footage, but I just couldn't fit all of it into the allotted time slot. But I did make room for viewer feedback. And here it is. So, Adam M. Ness from Fargo, North Dakota asks, yeah, I got a Pokemon question. Who's your favorite Pokemon? Well, here's the thing. I haven't played Pokemon in 15 years maybe, and I wasn't really that big a Pokemon fan. However, you know what? I guess I can go with the classics because this inspired me, and I definitely have to say Pikachu. Now tell me Pikachu is not your favorite Pokemon here. Anyway, that's it for this show. Hope to do some live calls with you guys. But right now, I'm probably going to drop dead from exhaustion. See you next week, if I survive.